So I've been meaning to hang this up for a while now, but with my extremely busy lifestyle, I couldn't find the time to go out and get a picture frame. So last year when I posted the pineapple video, I mentioned that I just got back from Puerto Rico where I visited the Calibre Hilton Hotel where the Pina Colada was invented. And while I was there, I visited the Ron del Barrilito distillery, which is Spanish for rum from the barrel. And while I was there, I did a mixology course, and at the end of the course, they gave me this certificate. This is my favorite rum from Puerto Rico, and it was my second time visiting the distillery, and you guys should really check it out. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be a special video because this video is going to be all about a bar called Milk and Honey and the cocktail renaissance. So what is Milk and Honey and why was there even a cocktail renaissance to begin with? Well, for that we have to go all the way back to the beginning of the golden age of cocktails. So the golden age of cocktails started at the beginning of the 1860s and lasted until the end of the 1960s. And what was happening at the beginning of the 1860s was just an intense amount of innovation in mixology. And this was largely due to an increased amount of access to ice, higher quality of spirits available. And during this early time, bartenders were seen as celebrities. And this is also when the most iconic cocktails were ever invented, like the martini, the old-fashioned, the Manhattan. And this was also the time when the first cocktail book was ever published, and that was Jerry Thomas's Bartender's Guide in 1862. And during this time, having cocktails became very social. They were enjoyed in upscale hotels and bars. They were enjoyed in railroad cars. And this cocktail culture continued to grow all the way through Prohibition. So Prohibition lasted from 1920 to 1933. And this was also the time where speakeasies were invented. So a speakeasy was a secret and illegal establishment that sold alcoholic beverages. Because during Prohibition, it wasn't just cocktails that were banned. It was all alcohol, even beer and wine. So these speakeasies were either hidden in basements or behind fake storefronts. And in order to avoid law enforcement, you either needed a password to get in, or a special knock, or you had to know someone. Even the type of cocktails adapted during Prohibition because just like I told you in the gin video where I showed you how to make the bee's knees, bartenders were adding syrups like honey syrup to mask that terrible flavor of bathtub gin. And so again, bathtub gin was any type of poorly made alcohol made in someone's home. And also during Prohibition, if an American bartender didn't work in a speakeasy, then they moved to either Europe or Cuba to work in bars, including Harry Craddock, who originally from the UK was working in the US and then moved to London at the start of Prohibition. And in 1930, he released one of the most popular cocktail books of all time, the Savoy Cocktail Book. So even though during this time Prohibition is going on in the US, cocktail culture is just continuing to strive throughout the world. So now the story takes us into the early 1930s, specifically 1933. So this was the time when Prohibition had ended and people are starting to drink cocktails again, but in legalized establishments this time. And then on top of that, you now have the start of the tiki culture. So just like I mentioned back in the tiki video, even though Prohibition had ended in 1933, this was also the time of the Great Depression, and people couldn't afford to go on exotic vacations anymore. So Don the Beachcomber opened up the first tiki bar in Hollywood. And though there were exotic cocktails, it was also decorated with tropical and Polynesian artifacts, because the whole purpose of tiki culture was to give people this sense of escapism during these tough times. So eventually the Great Depression ended in 1939. And this cocktail culture just continued to grow all the way to the end of the 1960s with people drinking cocktails in tiki bars, upscale hotels and bars and restaurants. Then, at the start of the 1970s, is what I call the dead cocktail era, which some other historians call this the dark ages of cocktails. So again, going back to the pineapple video, I touched a little bit on how the dead cocktail era started. So just to re-summarize, during this time is when the baby boomers were starting to reach adulthood and started to rebel against their parents and their country for going to war in the Southeast Pacific. And this is also the time of the disco era. And this is no coincidence. So what was happening at the disco era? People were going to nightclubs and no one was really going to upscale bars or restaurants anymore to have a cocktail. They're going to these disco clubs with a dance floor, and it was all about getting drunk as fast as possible. So the type of cocktails changed significantly throughout this era because they became a lot more sugary and sweet. So if cocktails are sweet, it gets the alcohol into your bloodstream faster and getting you drunk faster. So this was also the time when shots started, like cocktail shots. And even though the disco era ended at the end of the 1970s, leading through the 80s and the 90s was still the club era, where people were still going to clubs and drinking shots, just the music changed. And this was pretty much the cocktail scene all the way up until the end of the 1990s. And then that's when it all started for legendary bartender Sasha Petraske and the bar Milk and Honey. So Sasha Petraske had opened up Milk and Honey on December 31st, 1999, New Year's Eve at 134 Eldridge Street in New York's Lower East Side. So the bar had first opened as an exclusive private club that had no sign, no menu, even the phone number was apparently hard to get for reservations. So the bar was essentially a speakeasy, but it wasn't intended to be a speakeasy. It was just in a quiet location on Eldridge Street. So not long after the bar opened, word of Milk and Honey spread really quickly, and a lot of people tried to get in because they were attracted to this allure of this speakeasy bar. And like I said before, this bar had no menu, and they were one of the few bars in New York that were making pre-prohibition classics, and they even invented some of their own cocktails. So before I go too far into Milk and Honey, an honorable mention goes to the Rainbow Room, which was a bar in New York that opened up in 1934. And the bar had opened and closed multiple times for various reasons, either during World War II or for renovations. And then the bar closed again in 1986, but then reopened again in 1987 with head bartender Dale DeGroff. And during this time, Dale and his team of bartenders were serving cocktails that were similar to pre-prohibition classics with fresh fruit juices and high quality ingredients, different from these sweet sugary drinks that were being served in the nightclubs at the time. So even though the Rainbow Room didn't start the cocktail renaissance, they're credited for starting the cocktail movement. And then Milk and Honey just took it to a different level. So Sasha Petraske was just fascinated with the pre-prohibition era and with being classy, well-mannered, well-dressed, and proper etiquette. And all he really wanted was just a bar that brought back this feeling in time. Because originally he had plans of opening up a cafe that just slowly turned into a bar because he was inspired by the Rainbow Room and Dale DeGroff, who was a mentor to Sasha, and also the Angel Share, which was another bar serving these similar types of cocktails in the Lower East Village in New York. So sometime around 2012 or 13, Milk and Honey moved from its original location to a location on East 23rd Street. But in the original location of Milk and Honey, Sam Ross and Michael McElroy opened up a bar called Attaboy. But Milk and Honey didn't last really long in its new location and closed its doors in 2014. But Attaboy still remains to this day in the original Milk and Honey location. I had the opportunity to go there back in 2024, and this was just a really cool, sentimental experience for me to finally go to this bar that started the cocktail renaissance. Sadly, Sasha Petraske passed away in 2015, but if not for him and all the other bartenders at Milk and Honey, the cocktail scene wouldn't be what it is today. And most likely, none of us will be on YouTube watching videos on how to make cocktails. And as Milk and Honey was starting to gain popularity, it sparked for other cocktail bars to open up as well. It sparked for more creativity in cocktails. Even popular bartender Audrey Saunders, who opened up the Pigu Club in 2006, created the Intro to Aperol. And this was unique, where you have a liqueur acting as the base spirit, and you had an ingredient like gin just playing a supporting role to the Aperol. So even though the last word was invented around 1915, it wasn't revived until around 2003 or 2004 by Maurice Stinson at the Zigzag Cafe in Seattle. Even in my first video on Campari, where I showed you how to make the Inzoni, which was invented by Vincenzo Errico in 2002 at the Match Bar. But what I didn't tell you is that the cocktail was later perfected in 2003 at Milk and Honey. I left that part out on purpose for the sake of this video. There's a method to my madness. I'm not just making cocktails here, I'm telling a story along the way. So nobody really planned for a cocktail renaissance, it just sort of happened with the opening of Milk and Honey, and it sparked the inventive cocktail scene that we still have today. Now let's get into making 3 cocktails that were invented at Milk and Honey. So the first cocktail that I'm going to do is the Gold Rush. So this cocktail was invented sometime in the early 2000s by T.J. Siegel, and it's essentially a riff on the bee's knees. So instead of using gin, it calls for bourbon, and instead of being served up, it's served over ice in an old-fashioned glass. So for this cocktail, we're going to need bourbon, honey syrup, and lemon juice. So we're going to start off with 2 ounces of bourbon, 3/4 of an ounce of honey syrup, and 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice. Add ice and shake for 12 to 15 seconds. Put a large ice cube into an old-fashioned glass. And double strain. there you have the Gold Rush. Cheers. Wow, that's really good. This Four Roses plays really nicely with the honey syrup. Other than that, there's really not else much to say. It's just a really good drink. So the next cocktail that I'm going to do is the Chet Baker. So this milk and honey cocktail was invented back in 2005 by Sam Ross. So for this cocktail, we're going to take out the bourbon, bring in aged rum, sweet vermouth. We're going to keep the honey syrup, take out the lemon juice, and add in Angostura bitters. So I'm not sure what was the original rum that Sam Ross used for this cocktail. All I read is that it was a Caribbean rum, and I think it was a blend with multiple different rums from the Caribbean. I'm going to use one of my favorites, Ron del Barrilito. So in a mixing glass, we're going to start off with 2 ounces of aged rum, 2 bar spoons of sweet vermouth. Make sure you get it on the spoon and not on the counter. 1 bar spoon of honey syrup, and 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Add ice. And because I'm going to be serving this over a large ice cube, I'm only going to stir for 20 seconds. Put our large ice cube in an old-fashioned glass and strain. Garnish with an orange peel. And there you have the Chet Baker. Cheers. That's really nice too. The caramel flavor from the rum really shines through. It pairs well with the sweet vermouth, and the honey syrup kind of ties it all together. So in Canada, we don't have access to Ron del Barrilito, so if you wanted to, you can use the Eldorado 12. This is a really good sipping rum, but it comes in a little bit higher at $50 a bottle. I've mentioned this rum before. It's a really good workhorse Dominican rum at around $30 or so. So if you don't want to spend $50 on the Eldorado 12, then you can spend about $30 on the Brugal, and it's going to work pretty good in the cocktail. So the last cocktail that I'm going to do is arguably the most popular cocktail to ever come out of the Milk and Honey program. And that cocktail is the Penicillin. So for this one, we're going to take out the rum, bring in Blended Scotch, take out the sweet vermouth. We're going to keep the honey syrup, bring back lemon juice, take out Angostura bitters, add in ginger syrup, and Islay whiskey. So I know this is the first time that I'm introducing you to these two spirits here, but with a video that's on milk and honey, I couldn't say no to the Penicillin. But spoiler alert, there's a Scotch video coming up very soon. So to make this ginger syrup, I scraped off the skin of the ginger with a spoon. And then I diced it up. And then I put it through a juicer. And then I added equal parts sugar. And then I double strained it into a bottle just to discard some of those excess fibers. So we're going to start off with 2 ounces of blended Scotch, 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice, 3/8 of an ounce of honey syrup, and 3/8 of an ounce of ginger syrup. The Islay Scotch, we're just going to float on top. So add some ice and shake for 12 to 15 seconds. Add in a large ice cube again. And double strain. And I'm just going to float a bar spoon of Islay Scotch on top. And I'm going to garnish with a skewered piece of candied ginger. So I know I talk about how we don't have a lot of things in Canada, but we have this store called Bulk Barn. If you know, you know. So the great thing about the store is that you can buy as many or as little spices and candies as you want, because I don't use candied ginger very often, and I'm not going to go on Amazon and buy a massive bag of candied ginger. If I want only one piece of candied ginger, I'm buying one piece of candied ginger. Garnish with a skewered candied ginger. And there you have the Penicillin. Cheers. Wow, that's nice and complex. Right away, obviously, you get the Islay Scotch because it's floated on top. Some people put the Islay Scotch in the cocktail, so it's shaken up and distributed, but if you lay it on top, as you slowly drink it, the Islay Scotch will slowly get incorporated into the drink. Nice sweetness and flavor from the Scotch. The honey and the ginger syrup work so well together. A little bit of nice sweetness and a tiny bit of spice from the ginger syrup, so this is an absolute amazing cocktail. Okay, so that's it for today. I know I say this every video, but I really hope you enjoyed this one. And I really hope you enjoyed the history lesson on the golden age of cocktails, all the way through to the cocktail renaissance. Pour one out for the homies and try all three of these cocktails in honor of Sasha Petraske and the entire Milk and Honey program. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. I hope this video was as much fun for you as it was for me. Hit that like and subscribe button, follow me on Instagram for more recipes, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.